Welcome to another episode. What I'm going to show you in this one, and it's quite lengthy, so I thought up front I'd just show you what we're going to do so you can work out where you want to scroll through and have a look at. We're going to do the back of the car, the sills, the quarter, and go through the processes that we use to block back this spray polyester filler. So it's a range of blocks. I'm utilising the Mirka system. It's probably 90% dustless. So a range of blocks, the big long block. This one here you'll see me use a lot. I like that size block. And then a variation of blocks in different curves, flats. And I also use a few that don't work with the vacuum because from a size point of view, but you'll see that I actually still hold the vacuum to try and keep all that dust down. So I hope you get some value out of this. I'm going to show you the way I like to run with the body lines, to cut the lines in the panel and to make sure I've got a nice finish to go and move forward where we're going to go to the next stage where we go into putting a coat of primer on it. Righto, so this has got 3 coats of poly, but it's been mixed at the thinnest ratio because I wanted to put it through a 1.8 gun. The body was pretty good, so I didn't need a lot of fill. Hopefully I've got enough. And that's always that balance, knowing how much to do. So there was a bit of filler work done in here because there's a factory body line in here that Adam had gotten rid of. And you can see here now just that line compared to say that line, where this is a lot rounder, that one's quite sharp. And then this radius here is pretty much a factory. I've tried to keep that all steel, but the issue to me is to match this one to the other side. So on the other side over here, you'll see that I've put my trace coat on. So that's just the Mirka powder. So that's that fella there, the dry coat. And it's, you know, put it on and you're good to go. And you can sort of rub it in. And it works really good on these sort of coarse primers and fillers. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my block, and I've got some 240, some of the 240 Galaxy on there, so I've been doing along the sills and stuff with this piece. It's going pretty well. And what I'm going to do now is cut the face of this nice and flat, and then I'm going to go over and cut the other one the same to make sure I've got pretty much the same, that boomerang is the same on both sides. Then I'll take my widest radius and try and make the whole look the same, and hopefully don't run into steel or fillers or whatever. So I had it pretty close. So now it's just a case, so I'll go and turn the vacuum on and we'll make a start. Now the vacuum struggles a little bit because when I'm rubbing here and the holes don't necessarily, you know, you're not on a flat surface, but it still saves a lot of mess, I can assure you. So I'm going to use that paper, and I'm also going to use some of the Gold Flex Soft in the 240. So they're both 240. Yep, and I've just kicked the black stuff over. Now I like this block because of the size, but it just fits in my hand nice, and I feel like I'm sort of worked the panel really good with it. So at this stage I like to use this one. So I've just got to put a little bit of roundness in that, it's not dead flat. You can see we're starting to go back to our epoxy there. So that's giving me that line I'm after. So that's looking fairly straight around there. And I've got a little bit of a dip here, so I might just try and take a bit more off there. There we go. We're not talking much product. Right, so now I've got that, I'm going to put some black on the other side and I'll sand that and see how they compare. I like this black trace better than using a black paint. You can use like a pressure pack even and spray it on, but I just find it clogs the paper up where this stuff doesn't, and I can reapply this and then sand straight away. So how do we look if we compare the two? That there, slightly different to that there. So that'll be something I can catch that up a little bit, otherwise not too bad. Got black all over my hose now from cleaning up what I spilled on the floor. So if you've got any little nicks in your filler, or you've got too deep of scratches left from your filler, they'll show up in the black. So far so good for me. So I've already can see where I've pulled that liner back a little bit there now. See there where I've got my line, it's quite sharp there now, so I'll just take a bit more off that. And what I can do is I can come back with my powder, and if you feel you're running out of poly, you can use a lighter paper. So this is 240, but I'm comfortable to go again with that. So I go top and bottom. That'll give him a line. See how it's quite round, quite sharp. So I'm just going to take a bit more off of there and take very little off of that. So a lot of this is freehand sculpting really, and watching the shadows of what you're creating to see what your lines are like. So that's fairly consistent now all the way around. A little bit more off of there. And then I'll do here, I'll block down this way, and then I'll create that radius all the way around. Righto, so the sill. Now these were new sills. I didn't do any work filler under here, so they'll have a little bit of factory pressing marks in there. But these flat faces I did end up filling because they were not real nice. And they've been welded, you know, the join through here's been welded up. So we'll see what they come out like. I'm just going to throw a fresh piece of 240 on there. Normally I'd go 180 first. And if you've put this on real heavy, you can go 120. But I find it quite soft to rub. So when I was using the mesh, I'd use 180. I've found today with this Galaxy that the 240 is plenty coarse enough. So this is fairly flat. It's got a little bit of a radius in it, but it's fairly flat. And you'll just see how this straight away. Now if I've got my filler work good, there's nothing going to show up, but you can see a little bit on the edge and a bit low there. And a little bit of something there. So that's why we're using it. So I've cut through here already. Now when I did this, when I put this product on, it was in the booth and I didn't turn it, so I wasn't planning on putting a lot on here, and I obviously haven't got a lot on there, but enough to do the job by the look of it. So a little bit of cross-cutting, more so out of habit from using the mesh, because this stuff is a straight grain paper, so you don't really need to cut it as much, cross-cut it as much. So I'm just looking for my line through here now. Try and get that consistent. And we've got another step here. So I'm going to go up here, see if I can find my line, like that. Now I'll cut back up to that. So you can see there now, this is sharper than that. So I'm just going to keep working away to get it all the same. And then I'm going to leave that for now. I'm just starting to go through there, and I'm happy with that, but I need to do this line as well. And I'm going to need to drop it down. So I'll finish off along the bottom here. And then up the other way. You can see now that line's starting to show, so I need a bit more off here. That's not bad. I got a little bit here to get out. Like I said, I didn't fill from here under, so there may be a little bit of variation, but no more than you would see in a factory finish, and that's sort of what we're after with this build. Okay, so I want to leave a little bit of meat on there because I'm going to go along and round that off, probably with a different block in a minute. But in the meantime, I'm going to do this piece here. Now if I move my block, so I'm going to rub it there, that way. Move my paper over on the block, line my holes up, and get this wrapped around the edge so I can chop up into that line. And then I'll come back the other way. If your previous work's any good, you shouldn't have too much variation. Go up from one side, down from the other, and then I'm just going to go on the diagonal and put that nice little radius on it. And when I sand with the next grade, I'll probably do it on the machine and just make that a nice little radius. So that's looking pretty good. So I've got a line that starts from nothing here and then goes up and turns into this line. So what I'm going to do, just got my 240 again, I'm just going to take a little swipe up there and find it. So you can see it starting to come in here now. If I put a bit more trace on there, I don't know whether I did any filler work on this side, so these were new panels. I'll just put that back in, and then I want to do that same trick I did on the other side of the wheel arch. I'm going to turn that over and find my line. So you just got to be careful where I'm rubbing out here, but I'm looking to get this transition from nothing there into a line up through here. Have it nice and consistent and even. Now the reason I'm doing that with the paper is so I can get that round edge to follow that line. And effectively rub the line back into the panel. Like that, and I'm starting to see that nice line now, and now I'll come back out here. Now you could use that block with the curve in it. You can use a spline. I use this block and this flat block, and what I'm doing is I'm using my hand to rotate the block through the curve, and then I'm cross cutting, because it still comes down to your ability to use whatever you're using. If you use a spline and run straight up and down with it, you're going to cut a hole, put tram tracks in it. So there's a whole lot of different products that you can use for blocking with, but it still comes down to your ability to use that product. So I'm using these, and with the Velcro backing, people say they're too soft. I don't think they are. If you keep nice sharp paper and work the panel, you'll get a nice finish. Righto, so the next piece to go into polyester will be the firewall. So a lot of the outer edges aren't seen fully, but decided to tidy up all those edges. And this up here is pretty good, but there was a few rust areas that have been repaired. So I'm just going to put a couple of coats on there, and then that'll be able to be rubbed out. There we go, a couple of nice even coats of BP616. I just got to leave that for a minimum of 25 minutes, and by the sheet up to as long as 8 hours to recoat it, so without rubbing. So I'm going to go and have some lunch, come back and put the 712A poly over the top of it. So there we go. The firewall now has got 3 coats of the poly filler on it, so 712A, and I've put a bit up on the top of that dash, added a few rust pits and stuff in it, so that'll let us rub that out as well. And that'll enable me now to put the front back on it so that I can start blocking out the sides. One more panel ready to go under poly. So that's, I'll just give that a full run over with that square block on the machine just to make sure there's nothing I've missed. There's a couple of little pin dents here from the bolts being too long on the hinges. And you've seen us messing around with these corners and across the front. And I think a little bit to do with the pressing, but also too many big fat hands on that front edge when it's been closed a million times in fit up. So I'll mix up some epoxy now. I put 2 coats of the 616 on it, and then I'm going to put 3 coats of the polyester, the same as I've done with all the other panels. Another one down, so that's come up really nice. I ended up putting just 2 good solid coats on that, and product wise was 600ml, so that should block out nice. It's really only those edges that were a problem, so when I blocked I used that the Mirka block, the electric one, and there was a bit of variation in the panel, but not a lot. But that poly will take that out now, so that'll be good. We'll see how that goes. Righto, I thought I'd do a quick video on a flattish panel. So it's funny, people talk about a flat panel. There's not too often you've got a flat panel. This has got a bit of curve going in a few directions, but it's relatively flat. And obviously the holes in it is for a rear spoiler, so there's going to be some areas through here that aren't going to come out with the trace. Now, this was a repo panel, but we'd knocked the edges a bit trying to get some shape to match the quarters. So I'm going to run this over. I've got 3 fairly thin coats of the polyester filler on here, spray filler. I'm just going to put my black trace on as usual. I've said before, you can use a paint, in the old terminology, the old GMH black, which was an acrylic that in most panel shops would just be a spray gun laying around. It works fine. I've used pressure pack to do the same. The only thing I like about this better than that is that there's no drying time and it doesn't clog the paper, because this stuff doesn't clog at all. This is like a carbon based from my understanding. So we'll just put that on, and I'm looking to get a good even coverage of that so that I can see what I'm doing. And this tin's just about empty, so it's struggling a bit. Righto, that should do us. And I'll get the noisy vacuum on. Now what I'm going to use, I really like this block. In the old terminology, I call this a half sheet. So the old, sandpaper used to come in a sheet this size, so I call this a half sheet. And I like this because I'm covering a bigger area. So if I go with the other blocks that you could potentially use, what I like about this is the width of it, and it gives me, and you'll see the way I'll use it in a minute. If this had more curve in it, you may use this fella that's got the ability to adjust that curvature. So we'll probably use this on the roof of the car, whereby you can set the curve to the panel. But I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use this fella. I'll just turn my vacuum on. Now I'm using 180 in the Galaxy. Now in the past we were using mesh, so more like this sort of stuff, the Abranet, which I really liked. In the net I probably would start with 120, then go to 180. I find with this sandpaper based product, it doesn't need to be as heavy a grit. And I've probably got a bit of that mesh laying around. So that's the 180 in the mesh. And it was really good from a point of view of the vacuum side of things, but the way it's made, it's got lines, and if you run that straight up and down, it will leave lines, whereas with the paper it doesn't. The paper, you can pretty much go any direction, and this particular style paper is like a printed paper. Don't understand how that works, but that's what they tell me. So 180. So straight away you can see almost a little bit high there and a couple of lowish areas. Now I like to cross cut backwards and forwards, this way, that way. And the idea is not to be pushing down on this. I'm not trying to speed it up. I'm really looking for the paper to do the work. Now, this is probably a couple of weeks old, and I'm thinking I'm going to go back to the 120. So you've got to remember that there's a whole lot of new products for me here. One's the paper I'm using. Just line my holes up. So the paper's new to me, and I don't normally use a lot of poly. So if it sounds like I don't know what I'm doing, it's probably because I don't. So I've gone back to the 120. Let's just see how that compares. Now, like I said, no pressure, just let the paper do the work. That's a really good example where that's been drilled and the weight's been put on it. That's how big an area it's pulled down when that hole's been put in it. So it's interesting to note that this polyester now is a lot harder to rub now than it was a week ago. If you think about that, if it's now harder than what it was a week ago, potentially I could have sanded this and it would have shrunk a bit more as it was continuing to dry, because clearly it wasn't fully dry on I rubbed something else, the sill panels. Because I don't use a heater, it had to actually work through that process without the extra heat. Now here's a good example here. You can see a little bit of trace still there. We've probably played with this edge here and it's pulled that down a bit. So it's come out straight away, which is good. So I'm just going to get the bulk of this trace coat off, and then I'm going to trace it again, and I'm going to go to 180, and then I'm going to trace it again and go to 240. Okay, so you see there now, I'm pretty much through. So I've just got that corner out. And we're almost down, or we're down to the epoxy there. And I've got a bit of a line of trace here. So I'm going to work my way across, so we'll probably turn the camera off. I'll work across there, then I'll retrace it and we'll do the next layer. It's been a privilege to have worked for so many years with PPG. With their help over the last 25 years, we've been able to come up with some of the best paint in Australia. And I can say that from experience, having worked on things like Tailspin and also Boss XC, working with these guys to actually come up with the sort of finish we need on some of the cars that you can see there. Whether that's with their help or on my own, we've achieved some unbelievable results with such a great product. Thank you, PPG. Righto, so I've done the whole lot with the 120 and I did find it quite hard to rub, so it's a lesson to be learnt there, I guess. Somewhere around that 2 or 3 days is probably the best time to rub it. What I've done now is I've put my trace coat back on and I'm going to go over it now, so I've gone to 180. And I've got a couple of areas on the edges where I'm starting to run out of the poly. So I want to try not to go through the epoxy if I can, but if I do, it's not the end of the world because I've got to re-epoxy this before I put my primer on. So now that I've cut that, it should come up fairly easily. So you can just see how that trace coat is staying in those deep 120 scratches. So I'd like to try and remove all of those now with this next grade. Because what happens is if I leave 120 scratches, when I go to actually prime this, if there's 120 scratches, I've got to fill those 120 scratches up. And if you imagine that's a scratch, the 120 might be like that, and then the 180's like that, and then the 240 and so on. They get smaller and smaller. If I fill that deep scratch with product, it's potentially going to shrink into that scratch. So that's what you've got to be careful of. You can see there a couple of lines. To put my hand underneath and feel where the inner panel is, it might be that there's a couple of dobs of sealant that's joining the two panels together. And on a boot and a bonnet, sometimes if you rub too hard, if the panels join together, it will actually, the block will ride over that. And you can block it a million times and it'll still show up, and it's normally because you're rubbing too hard. So, not a lot of pressure, primarily about letting the sandpaper do the work. So I'm just cross-cutting here because it's got a little curve in it. And I want to just follow that curve. Right, see here now, pretty much through the polyester, and I've got a tiny bit of trace there, so there's obviously a little bit of undulation in that panel, and that's what we're taking out. I'm going to try and steer clear of that because I've got nothing showing. I've got a couple of scratch marks, but I really don't have any trace coat. So I want to stay away from that because I still want to sand this probably on the machine with some 240 before we go to primer. You see there where that's been drilled and probably pushed. bit of bare metal. Like I say, I'm not fussed because I'm going to re-epoxy it all. And I'll do that wet on wet with a primer prime when we put that on. Righto, I'll finish the edges off, so that's the 180, and then I'll put some trace on it now and run over it with the machine with some 240. If you've got an edge like this, so this pretty much flat through here, just, you know, very slight taper on the edges, and obviously rounded into here. So I'm just going to use the 180 because it's a very small area, and I should be able to run along there and take that back. And what I'm looking to do is to get, see that it went straight back to an edge, and here it's a bit round. So I'm looking to get rid of that roundness because it should be a fairly square edge. And along the top here, I should end up with a straight line. Like I said, there's not much on here, as you can see, that's gone already. When I go this way, so I haven't rubbed this front edge with the 120, I'm just using the 180. And what I want to try and do is get an even line, and then I'm going to create that radius. Because if you watched the last episode, you would have seen that we're talking microns of thickness. We're not talking millimetres, we're talking not a lot of product. So it doesn't take much when you're using something like 120 or 180 to cut through it. So you can see now I've got that line. I'll now probably get a soft block. Got quite a lot of versions of blocks, so you can have something like that that's really soft. So if you can imagine, if I hold a bit of paper on there, right, it's probably firm enough to keep it straight, but will make a nice round edge. Something like that's probably a little bit too hard. This one is a colour sanding block, so you could use that. Or then this one here, I found at my good friend Bunnings when we were doing tailspin. It's just got a little bit of flexibility, but it's got the Velcro on it, so you can actually use something like that on it, and it will actually hold the paper. So I'm thinking I like the feel of this one. I've got a bit of 180. You can see there how it bends to the shape. And very carefully remove that trace coat. It's as quick as that. If you do any more than that, you're going to run out of product. Because what I'm going to do now is, when I use the machine, I'll run that along there and just take that edge off, and that'll be really nice. Now, so we're still on 180, creating that edge. I reckon you could nearly go 240. That ripped that really quick. So could use some of that. So that's 240, foam back. That's the gold soft. We use that a lot. So I could use that on there. Now you see how that's a lot more gentle. That would create a little bit rounder curve than what the 180 did. I actually like that better. see here we've found our edge. In fact, we're through to the metal, but we've created a radius that I believe will now be nice and even for the full length of that panel. It's probably less than, you know, 0.1 or 2 of a millimetre thick. So that's, I'll finish the rest off now with the 180. I'm going to trace it again and then we'll get a machine out, run the machine over it, and be ready for primer. Just grab some 240. I've put my foam interface on. Now what I'm doing here now, some people may cringe at. This is really about a very light buzz over. I'm not looking to fix highs and lows. I'm just trying to take out the sanding marks from the 120, 180. And I'm taking very little product off. I'm just trying to clean up the surface so that we've got a good surface for our epoxy to go down onto. So we're going to do 2 coats of epoxy and then 3 coats of primer. So this is really about a clean up, not a sanding process. You see straight away the deep scratches there. Now I'm not going to chase them out because clearly they look like 120. If I do that, I'm going to end up with a dip. All I'm doing is just taking the very top rough edge off so that I've got a nice clean surface. That just shows how quick you can take product off by turning it up on its edge like that, just to smooth them out where I know the spoiler is going to cover it. Seen how quickly that product disappeared. So it's all about keeping it nice and smooth so that you're not making a mess. The last job I've got to do now is on this edge. So we've sanded across flat here, haven't touched this outside edge. So I'm looking for a nice factory rounded edge there. So I've got the 240, I might go to some 400 I think, because it's pretty fine. What I'm looking to do is to create that nice edge and make sure I don't have any nicks in it. And more often than not, the nicks are as if you've actually welded the edges to do your gaps. So this boot lid didn't need to be gapped, so it hasn't been done, that I can remember. And I'm just running my thumb along there to feel the smoothness and to create a very consistent round edge on that panel. And if you've been doing any filler work, here's an example. You can see there the trace. So I need to get rid of that like that, so that there's one little tiny nick there now that I'll need to put something in probably, so that must have had a bit of repair there. And what I'm looking to do now is get that nice consistent radius on that panel. I don't like a panel that's been made, you know, nowadays a lot of the sides of the cars are nice and flat and everything's good. When you get to the end of the door, I don't believe it should have a square end on it, because they never were made that way ever from a factory. I like to put my little radius on so that I've got that nice factory feel about the panel, even if we've had to make the panel. So that's the look I like there. So I'm just going to check myself all the way around. Then I'm ready for my primer, because when I do my primer, I don't want to be messing around cutting through on the outside edges. The other thing I'll say about that edge, if that comes to a point, it's very difficult to get the paint to cover properly, because it gets a bit of static and the paint will go on and it'll want to pull away from the edge, and quite often it'll want to ramp up, be real thin and then ramp again. When you try and colour sand, it's very difficult, but if you've got a nice round edge, the paint will actually flow and cover it. and you don't get such a big build up on this edge that's created through that static. Righto, so I thought I'd bring that straight in the booth and put a couple of coats on it so that we can follow through with the filming. So there's a few little areas where I've gone through the bare metal, and like I said earlier, I'm not worried about that because I'm about to put some DP616 epoxy on it. So what I'm going to do now, I've given it a blow off, give it a quick prep sole, not too much, and I'm ready now to go. So I'll just give that a quick wipe with the tack rag. I'm just using a 1.3 nozzle on my old Misada, what is it, it's a 100 BF. Throw that on, nice and thin, and then I'll wet on wet with the primer prime. And I'll put 3 coats of the primer prime. It can then sit and wait until we're ready to go up to PPG and put the colour on. One of the issues about this whole process of, paint on, off, this being a GM car, the issues I haven't faced before is the fact that it's sitting on a chassis. So when we go to put it back on the chassis, it can move because it's all rubber mounted. So we've spent the morning this morning getting all the parts back on it and now working through the adjustment because I can't block out the polyester until such time as I know the panels are back where I want them. One of the issues you have is the fact that when you paint the door pillar, with 2 coats of epoxy and 3 coats of poly, things grow. So the doors at the moment, the same thing, because the back of the door gets painted, the hinge moves out a bit. This panel here has been painted, so everything starts to shrink in size. So we're just working our way through that process. It's going pretty good at the moment. And what I'm doing now is I've gone through with a pencil. So I just use like a normal pencil that's a H700H. I've had them for years. By using pencil, it's not going to come back through. If you use a pen or like a biro or a texter, it'll come back through your paintwork. So I've just gone along and marked what I think is the center of those lines. Then using my timber straight edge here, I then mark those through that body line so that we can adjust the panels firstly. And when I now go to do this, I'll show you that I actually tape to here on block down and then the same the other way to get that body line nice and straight. And the same here, when you get this sort of shape, when I go to block up and block down and then put my radius on, I've gone along and marked on 3 places. And because it's not straight, I can actually just tip this up, and I had someone help me hold one end so that I can put it on the body line, run my pencil along. I can then come back and just use the shadow to make sure that's where I want my line to be, because now I'll tape to that, sand up to it, sand out to it, round the edge off. And that just enables me to get all those 9 lines really nice and how I want them to be. So we're almost ready to go. The next stage then, and I'll show you what I'm doing, is we'll put the trace coat on, start blocking out the poly. Righto, so we're going to start blocking the body now. So you see me do the line with the pencil and all. So what I've done now is just got some tape and run along that line so that I can block up to that. I'm not looking to block right into it, but I just need to know where I've got to go. Different down the bottom here though, because I'm going to block right down to that line. And the whole process is about trying to get everything straight. Now, if you don't do the pencil line and you get your tape and you pull it, it's very easy to bend the tape. So you might want a straight line, but if you pull the tape the wrong way, it'll actually drop away. So make sure that you get your lines right with your pencil and then get your tape and follow the line, rather than thinking that if you pull the tape tight, it'll be straight, because more often than not it won't be. So that's the first little tip for today. I'm now going to put my black trace on there, get some gloves on. So remembering that this polyester spray filler is exactly that, it's filler, so it's porous, so you can't wet rub it. So it's got to be all dry rubbed, and then once you've got it rubbed, you seal it with epoxy, and then you go to your primer, and then if you want to do wet rub, you can do that. Right, this one looks pretty old. Let's see how this goes, whether there's any left in it. Oh, good day. Now I've already sanded this back bit here when I was doing around the tail lights. Make sure you get a nice even coat. There you can see where you've been. Now block-wise for this, I'm going to use my favourite half sheet block on these big areas, and then I've had a bit of a look. These clip-on ones, the two different radiuses, this one here seems to fit really well into that curve. So I'm going to use that and rub down into that curve there and back around into the line. So let's get the vacuum on and get into it. So I've gone to the 180 because of the shape of the panel, and I believe it'll still cut it fairly quickly, even though I know it's quite hard because it's a couple of weeks old now. So I want to use that as my guide, and I'll get that, you know, roughly 8 to 10 mil line running all the way along. Now, I'm not happy the way it's riding there and there, so I'm going to go to the other round one. That's better. You can see there that curve motion. trying to just follow the natural shapes of the body. Because there's no door rubber, I've got that just sitting in a little bit on the catch, I think. Because this is my first coat, so I'm 180 on the very heavy peeled filler, I'm just going to cut that edge back nice and flat. So the trick is, don't let it roll into that edge, because if you let it roll in, it's going to be exactly that. I'll have a rolled edge and I want it to be nice and flat. You can see there, that little bit of trace that's left there, obviously there's a little low there. So we've just got to take that out over a big area, and as you can see, because of that, I'm nearly through. Now when I mix this filler, spray filler, I only mixed it, I mixed it to the thinnest setting because I've only got a 1.8mm gun, but I don't like it real thick anyhow. So you just got to be aware of, depending on how much you want to do, how thick you mix it and how many coats you put on. Now that I know where my line is there, I'm just going to pull this back off a bit. Because I need that line now to disappear, to transition. Righto, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to put my tape on the, well, I'll do this one, I'll show you this one first. Now I've already sanded from here up, I just haven't done along the line. I'm just going to go along now. So see how it's quite wide there and narrow here, I just need a bit more out of there like that. little bit of tape left there from the last time. Now these lines, quite sharp, and then it disappears into there. So I'm just going to very lightly make that disappear. And see how much product's coming off of there when there's no vacuum. Now once you get to this stage, I'll go to a bit of 240. So this is going to be a rolling cross cut with virtually no pressure, and I'm just looking to create that line. If you've got good lighting and the lights are in the right place, your shadow will actually show you how sharp it is. So at the moment it's a little bit rounder there than it is here, and it's quite round there and a little bit sharp there. Now if I take that same block and get a couple of sheets of 400 gold, which is the foam backed, put it on there, very lightly I can create whatever shape I want. It's nice when a plan comes together. And of course this is the first rub, so this is 180, then you probably need to do a 240, and then you need to buzz it up with some 400 to put the primer on it. So this is the main shaping coat. Rub, whatever. Not very dark, is it? Worn out will be. done my flats, done the curve over this curve. I'm right on the line here. Now I'm going to go out wide because I want this nice wide radius tapering up to nothing. So I've got that pretty much to where I want. So I'm on 180, so I'm going to go to some 240 in a minute. But you really need to get the very top edge off it because of the orange peel, and if you go too fine a paper you won't get rid of it. If I go back to that 400 with the foam on it, that foam will tend to give me that nice round edge. Now don't forget, this is filler, so we've still got to do primers. So this is about shaping the actual structure before we end up going through the finer grits when we get down to that primer stage. So I'm looking for this to transition into flat now. Now something I've done a fair bit of is to put the paper over the edge of your block like that. And it gives you a bit of a round edge to work with. Remembering that's 400. You can see all the dust. Okay, that's pretty much a done deal. I'm happy with the way that's coming out, and I can tell with the shadows from my lights what shape I've got. So what I'm going to do now is trace it again, sand it again with some 240, and then we'll just run the machine over it when we're all done, so we can go and put it back in epoxy and then put the primer on it. Well, I hope you got some value out of that. So it's a never-ending process. So I've obviously got things like the bonnet and all to do. What I wanted to finish up with, just make sure if you're doing this sort of work that you fit things up. So these surrounds, you know, the lights, all those sorts of things, as we've gone through the process and we keep making changes, you need to make sure they fit, because what you don't want to do is paint the car, then go to fit the lights and they're either not in the middle properly, or what can happen is this surround, we've actually had to add filler to that to get it to fit to the light properly. So obviously we need to do that before we get to paint. So this is the last time these will be on here. Some of these are going to go off for powder coat, some of the others I'm going to paint, and we'll do that in the following episodes. So thanks for joining us. Don't forget, if you like what you're watching and you don't want to miss out, subscribe. You can click the button that'll make sure that they let you know when the new one's coming out. And if you've got any questions, don't be frightened to ask, because I answer every question on the channel. And we'll see you on the next one.